The passengers know that they would be making history along the way. During the flight, Pan Am Flight 6 was halfway across the Pacific Ocean when it developed some engine trouble. The four-engine plane initially only had one of its four engines down, but in just moments of the first engine failing, a second one started to have trouble as well. Down on two engines, the airplane was ascending into the dark waters below. The plane was barely able to stay airborne, but the pilots knew they had time to think of the best course of action to take. One option was to keep flying until daylight before attempting an emergency landing. Another option was to jettison fuel and try to land on the water immediately. One thing was for sure though, the damaged engines were sucking up more fuel than they were supposed to, making reaching San Francisco or even flying back to Honolulu an impossible task. The decision was made to wait until morning, which in hindsight was the best decision the pilot made. The aircraft successfully made the water landing with all 24 passengers and 7 crew walking out alive, making Pan Am Flight 6 the first flight in history to land on the ocean with everyone surviving. Aeroflot Tupolev Tu-124 was scheduled to fly from Tallinn Airport in Estonia to Moscow Vnukovo International Airport. The Tu-124, registered as CCCP 45021, carried 44 passengers and 7 crew members. Its trouble started even before takeoff, but was only discovered after the fact when the ground crew noticed a bolt had detached from the aircraft and was lying on the runway. This caused the landing gear to not retract fully, sticking out from the belly of the airplane halfway. The flight would have returned to Moscow Vnukovo to do a belly landing, but permission was denied due to heavy fog. They were then rerouted to St. Petersburg to do an emergency landing at the Pulkovo airport. When circling St. Petersburg to reduce its fuel load, a requirement when doing emergency landings to lessen the added danger of the jet fuel catching fire, the crew had a brilliant idea. They were going to cut a hole at the bottom of the plane from the inside and use a long pole to push the landing gears back into place. The plan would have probably worked, but Murphy's Law once again reared its ugly head. This time, the fuel gauges were defective and reporting that the plane had more fuel than it actually had. They only found that they no longer had fuel when the engine stopped running. Now, landing in Pulkovo Airport is no longer an option, so the pilot decided to do a water landing on the Neva River. As the Tu-124 glided and nearly missed the Alexander Nevsky Bridge, the pilot gently landed the aircraft on the Neva. However, as the plane touched down, the fuselage broke. Water started coming in and the Tupolev started sinking. Luckily though, a tugboat was nearby and arrived near the ditched jet. The tugboat carried the Tu-124 to a nearby pier, where everyone on board disembarked without any injuries. Local authorities recovered Flight 980 was a flight scheduled to fly from John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York City to Princess Juliana International Airport in St. Martin, Netherlands Antilles. The flight carried 57 passengers and 6 crew. The flight crew consisted of Captain Ballsy DeWitt, First Officer Harry Evans II, and Navigator Hugh Hart. Flight 980 made a normal departure from Kennedy Airport and had an uneventful flight to the Caribbean. After the flight was given clearance to descend to 10,000 feet, regional air traffic control advised that weather in St. Martin wasn't really ideal for a safe landing. With that, Captain DeWitt decided the best course of action was to take a detour to San Juan. He was already well on his way when air traffic control radioed again, this time informing the captain that the weather had improved and landing would now be possible. So the captain then turned his plane around back to St. Martin. He lined up for the landing, but due to the bad weather, he failed to see the runway in time, missing his first landing attempt. He tried a second landing attempt with the same results. They tried yet another time, and this time the aircraft was too high on the approach, so the landing had to be aborted yet again. After assessing the weather and fuel situation, the crew elected to divert to St. Croix. While doing so, the crew discovered a fatal error. There was a massive discrepancy between the fuel gauge readings and what had been computed as the amount of fuel remaining. In short, they didn't have enough fuel to land in St. Croix. The crew decided to attempt a water landing in the Caribbean Sea 30 miles off the coast of St. Croix. Amazingly, everything happened without the passengers knowing anything of the situation. You see, the PA system on the aircraft wasn't working, and although the pilot flashed the seatbelt prior to ditching in the water, the passengers were still completely in the dark as to what was about to happen. And unfortunately, due to this lack of info, a domestic passenger flight from Hussein Sastranegara International Airport in Bandung to Negara Rai International Airport in Bali, Indonesia. On the 13th of April 2013, the Boeing 737-800 operating the flight crashed into water short of runway while on final approach to land. There were 2 pilots and 5 flight attendants with 101 passengers on board, consisting of 95 adults, 5 children, and 1 infant. 97 passengers were Indonesian, 1 French, 1 Belgian, and 2 Singaporean. 6 of the crew were Indonesian, while 1 man came from India. The Indonesian National Transportation Safety Committee published a preliminary report on May 15, 2013. Flight data show that the aircraft continued to descend below the minimum descent altitude, 466 feet from ground level. The report found that at 890 feet, the first officer reported that the runway was not in sight. At approximately 151 feet, the pilot again stated that they could not see the runway. Flight data showed that the pilots attempted to perform a go-around at approximately 20 feet, which proved too late as the aircraft made contact with the water's surface moments later. All this information was gathered from the plane in the Hudson River. And so he did successfully, landing the massive aircraft in the Hudson River with no fatalities or even major injuries. Captain Sully was given honors upon honors for his successful landing, and for saving the lives of hundreds of people. The incident has since been called the